What if the biggest lie you ever told turned out to be the exact thing that saved you from absolute ruin? Arthur Kensington, a single father worth $70 million, deliberately wore thrift store boots and drove a rusted 2006 Honda to every blind date, desperately hunting for a woman who wanted his heart, not his bank account. Arthur Kensington sat in the driver's seat of a violently vibrating 2006 Honda Civic, watching the engine temperature gauge inch perilously close to the red zone. The car smelled faintly of stale French fries and wet dog, a remarkable feat, considering Arthur didn't own a dog. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting the collar of a faded, slightly frayed flannel shirt. He looked tired. He looked broke. He looked exactly how he wanted to look. In reality, Arthur was the founder of Kensington Tech Solutions, a cybersecurity firm he had sold 2 years prior for a staggering sum. He lived in a sprawling modernist estate in the hills of Austin, Texas, had a private chef and an investment portfolio that generated more money in a day than most people saw in a decade. But none of that mattered to him as much as his 7-year-old daughter, Chloe. Since his wife passed away from leukemia 5 years ago, Arthur had been thrust into the terrifying world of modern dating, and the results had been catastrophic. The moment women Googled his name or saw the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, their eyes changed. The warmth became calculated, the affection became a transaction. He had barely survived a vicious lawsuit from a former fiancée who tried to claim palimony after a 6-month engagement. From that day on, Arthur instituted the poverty test. Tonight's test subject was Jessica Harrington, a woman his well-meaning friend David had set him up with. David had sworn Jessica was down to earth and sweet. Arthur stepped out of the sputtering Honda and walked into the Rusty Spoon, a notoriously mediocre diner on the outskirts of the city. He had chosen it specifically for its peeling vinyl booths and fluorescent lighting that hummed like an angry hornet. Jessica was already in a corner booth. She was undeniably beautiful, wearing a tailored silk blouse and carrying a designer handbag that cost more than the car Arthur had just parked. As Arthur approached, her eyes scanned him from head to toe. The smile David had promised vanished instantly, replaced by a tight, practiced grimace. "You must be Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with thinly veiled disappointment. She didn't offer her hand. "That's me. Sorry I'm a few minutes late," Arthur said, sliding into the creaking vinyl booth across from her. Traffic on the I-35 was a nightmare, and my radiator was acting up. Jessica blinked slowly. "Your radiator? Right. David mentioned you were in a transitional phase." "You could say that," Arthur replied, with a self-deprecating chuckle. He stuck to his meticulously crafted backstory. "I'm trying to get a modest landscaping business off the ground, mostly mowing lawns right now, trying to save up for a reliable truck. It's tough out there, especially being a single dad to my little girl, Chloe." He watched her carefully. This was the crux of the test. A decent person would ask about Chloe. A decent person would express empathy. Jessica physically recoiled. A landscaper and a child. She picked up the laminated, sticky menu like it was contaminated. "David told me you were an entrepreneur." "Lawn care is a business," Arthur said mildly. "Right." Jessica sighed heavily, looking around the diner with open disgust. "Well, I suppose I should order something since I'm already here. Do they even serve wine in a place like this?" Before Arthur could answer, a waitress approached their table. "Good evening," the waitress said. Her voice was surprisingly soft, carrying a melodic authority that cut through the diner's ambient noise. "Can I get you started with some drinks?" Arthur looked up and felt a sudden, inexplicable jolt. The waitress wore a standard, shapeless polyester uniform and an apron stained with cherry syrup. Her dark hair pulled back into a messy, utilitarian bun. Her name tag read Clara, but it was her eyes that caught him off guard. They were piercingly intelligent, a striking shade of amber, and carried a quiet, almost intimidating confidence that completely mismatched her surroundings. "I highly doubt you have anything I actually want to drink," Jessica snapped at Clara without making eye contact. "Bring me a sparkling water with lemon, and make sure the glass is actually clean. Last time I was in a place like this, I caught something." Clara didn't flinch. Her expression remained completely neutral, though Arthur caught the faintest tightening at the corner of her jaw. "Sparkling water, Lemon. And for you, sir." "Just a black coffee, please," Arthur said, giving Clara an apologetic look. "Take your time." Clara nodded and walked away. Arthur watched her go, intrigued. There was something about her posture, her back perfectly straight, her steps measured and deliberate. She moved like she owned the building, not like someone making minimum wage wiping down tables. "Don't stare at the help, Arthur. It's tacky," Jessica hissed, leaning forward. "Let's get one thing straight. I am a brand manager for luxury cosmetics. I have a lifestyle to maintain. I told David I was looking for a provider, not a charity case." Arthur felt the familiar, heavy sinking in his chest. "I understand. I just thought, if two people connect." "Connect?" Jessica let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Arthur, you're pushing 40, driving a garbage can and cutting grass. You shouldn't be dating. You should be working a second job so your daughter doesn't end up on food stamps." The words hit like a physical blow. Arthur's hands clenched into fists under the table. He was used to rejection, but the casual cruelty directed at his ability to provide for Chloe made his blood boil. He had millions sitting in offshore accounts, yet in this moment, sitting in his faded flannel, the insult stung just as deeply as if it were true. Just then, Clara returned with their drinks. As she placed the sparkling water in front of Jessica, the condensation on the glass caused it to slip slightly. A single solitary drop of water splashed onto the sleeve of Jessica's silk blouse. Jessica exploded. "Are you blind?" she shrieked, jumping up so violently the table shook. "This is a $600 blouse, you clumsy, incompetent idiot!" The entire diner went dead silent. The few patrons at the counter turned to stare. Clara stood perfectly still. She didn't cower. She didn't apologize profusely. She simply looked at Jessica with a chillingly calm expression. "It is water, ma'am. It will dry." "I want your manager!" Jessica screamed, her face flushed with ugly rage. "You are going to pay for dry cleaning, and then you are going to be fired. Do you know who I am?" "Jessica, enough," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the boardroom authority he usually kept hidden. "It was an accident. Sit down." Jessica glared at him. "Don't you dare speak to me like that. You're just as pathetic as she is. You two deserve each other." She grabbed her designer bag. "I'm leaving, and you can pay the check, landscaper." She stormed out of the diner, the bell above the door aggressively jingling in her wake. Arthur let out a long, exhausted breath and rubbed his temples. The silence in the diner slowly dissipated as the low hum of conversation resumed. "I apologize for the scene," Arthur said quietly, looking up at Clara, expecting her to be on the verge of tears. Instead, Clara was watching the door where Jessica had exited, a faint, almost amused smirk playing on her lips. She turned to Arthur, her amber eyes sparkling with sharp intellect. "Don't apologize," Clara said smoothly. "In my experience, trash usually takes itself out." Arthur stared at the waitress in stunned silence before a genuine, booming laugh escaped his chest. It was the first time he had laughed honestly in months. Clara smiled, the expression softening her striking features. She picked up Jessica's untouched sparkling water and casually poured it into a nearby potted plant. "You have terrible taste in women, Arthur." "I can't take the credit for that one," Arthur said, leaning back in the booth. "A blind date set up by a friend who clearly secretly hates me. I'm really sorry she yelled at you, Clara. Is your manager actually going to give you grief over this?" Clara paused for a fraction of a second. A strange, fleeting look crossed her face before she smoothly replied, "The manager and I have an understanding. I wouldn't worry about my job." Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a battered leather wallet. He deliberately kept only small bills in it for these dates. He began laying crumpled $1 bills on the table to cover the coffee he hadn't even drank yet. "Still, here's a tip for dealing with the hurricane." Clara looked at the handful of crumpled dollars. She looked at Arthur's frayed cuffs, the exhaustion in his eyes, and the way he carefully counted the remaining singles in his wallet. "Keep your money, Arthur," Clara said gently, pushing the bills back toward him. "Coffee is on the house tonight. It looks like you need it more than I do." Arthur felt a sudden pang of intense guilt. Here was a woman working the night shift in a dingy diner, refusing a tip from a man secretly worth nearly $100 million because she thought he was destitute. It was exactly the kind of genuine compassion he had been desperately searching for, but receiving it under false pretenses made him feel like a fraud. "I insist," Arthur said. "I may be scraping by, but I always pay my debts." Clara crossed her arms, leaning against the edge of the booth. "You mentioned a daughter. Chloe?" "Yeah, she's 7. The light of my life," Arthur said, his face naturally lighting up at the mention of her. "She's with my neighbor tonight." "Save the singles for Chloe," Clara said firmly. "Buy her an ice cream tomorrow. Consider it a favor to me." Arthur was mesmerized. There was no pity in her voice, only a profound, practical empathy. "You're a very rare kind of person, Clara. Most people run the other way when they smell financial trouble. Most people are idiots who value the wrong currency," Clara replied effortlessly. She wiped down the table with her rag, though she did it with an odd clumsiness, as if she wasn't entirely used to the physical motion. "Money is just math. Character is what actually keeps the lights on when things go dark." Arthur couldn't believe what he was hearing. "When do you get off your shift?" he blurted out before he could stop himself. Clara stopped wiping. She looked at him, her amber eyes assessing him with a surgical precision that made Arthur feel entirely exposed. "In 20 minutes. Why?" "Because you let me off the hook for a $2 coffee," Arthur said, his heart beating a little faster. "And I'd like to repay you by taking you to the 24-hour donut shop down the street. It's not a fancy steakhouse, and I drive a car that might explode, but I'd really like to talk to you more." Clara hesitated. For a moment, Arthur swore he saw a flash of genuine panic in her eyes, as if she were weighing a massive, high-stakes business decision. Then she smiled. "Let me go grab my coat." 20 minutes later, Clara emerged from the back room. She had ditched the apron and wore a simple, unbranded black trench coat. As they walked out to the parking lot, Arthur gestured to his rusted Honda. "Behold," Arthur said dryly, "the chariot." Clara didn't laugh or make a face. She just slid into the passenger seat. When the engine roared to life with the sound of a dying lawnmower, she simply adjusted the broken AC vent. They drove to a cheap donut shop a few miles down the road. They sat in a corner booth, eating stale glazed donuts and drinking bitter coffee from styrofoam cups. And for the next 3 hours, Arthur experienced the most electric, effortless conversation of his life. He played his part, complaining about the cost of lawnmower parts and the struggle of finding good public schools for Chloe. He hated lying to her, but the deeper they got into the conversation, the more terrified he became of breaking the spell. If he told her the truth now, she would think he was a psychotic manipulator. But as Arthur spoke, he began to notice anomalies about Clara. When he talked about the struggles of balancing a budget, Clara nodded sympathetically, but her response was oddly macroeconomic. "It's a systemic issue," she mused, swirling her cheap coffee. "The supply chain bottlenecks over the last 2 fiscal quarters have artificially inflated the cost of raw materials across every sector. It trickles down to the blue-collar level aggressively." Arthur blinked. "That's a very thorough analysis of lawnmower parts." Clara froze. A slight flush crept up her neck. "I read a lot. Between shifts. You know, trying to educate myself. Hoping to get into community college for business administration. Well, you definitely have the head for it," Arthur said, though his mind was racing. Later, Arthur accidentally knocked his phone off the table. It was a burner phone he used for his fake persona, a cracked, outdated android. As he bent to pick it up, he noticed Clara's wrist protruding from her coat sleeve. There, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the donut shop, was a watch. It was subtle, elegant, and instantly recognizable to a man of Arthur's background. It was a Patek Philippe Nautilus in rose gold. A watch that retailed for over $100,000 and currently had a 5-year wait list. Arthur stared at it for a fraction of a second before sitting back up. His brain misfired. Why does a diner waitress have a $100,000 watch? "Is everything okay?" Clara asked, noticing his sudden silence. She instinctively pulled her sleeve down, hiding her wrist. "Yeah," Arthur lied smoothly. "Just tired." He rationalized it quickly. It had to be a fake. A really, really good knockoff she bought on the street. People in tough financial spots often bought fake luxury items to feel a semblance of control or status. He wasn't going to judge her for it. "I should get you back to your car," Arthur said, checking the time. It was nearly 2 a.m. As they walked back to his Honda, Arthur felt a desperate need to see her again. "Clara, I know this isn't much of a pitch. I don't have much to offer right now. But would you want to do this again? A real date? I think there's a free botanical garden exhibit on Sunday. We could pack a lunch." Clara stopped under the glow of a flickering streetlight. She looked at him with an expression of deep, complex conflict. What Arthur didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that Clara Dubois was not a waitress. She was the CEO and majority shareholder of Dubois Global Logistics, a multi-billion-dollar shipping conglomerate based in New York. She was currently in Texas, overseeing the hostile takeover of a regional real estate firm. The Rusty Spoon was a commercial property her company had just acquired, and Clara, notoriously obsessive about her acquisitions, had gone undercover to see why the diner was hemorrhaging cash before she decided to bulldoze it. She lived in a world of ruthless boardrooms, corporate espionage, and men who only saw her as a merger opportunity or a conquest. She was exhausted. She was lonely. And sitting across from this humble, struggling single father who worried about public schools and treated her with genuine respect, it was the most intoxicating breath of fresh air she had felt in a decade. But if she said yes, she would be committing to a massive lie. She looked at Arthur's hopeful, tired eyes. She looked at his frayed flannel collar. Just one more day, Clara told herself. Just one real, normal day, before I have to go back to being a monster in a tailored suit. I would love that, Arthur, Clara said softly. Sunday at the gardens. It's a date. Sunday afternoon at the Zilker Botanical Garden was bathed in golden Texas sunlight. Arthur arrived with Chloe holding his hand, both wearing faded denim. He carried a battered canvas cooler packed with homemade turkey sandwiches. He was a bundle of nerves, terrified that the magic of the donut shop would evaporate in the daylight. Then he saw Clara. She was waiting by the entrance, wearing a simple linen sundress and woven sandals. She looked utterly radiant, yet Arthur's razor-sharp eye caught a glaring discrepancy. The canvas tote bag resting on her shoulder looked plain to the untrained eye, but Arthur recognized the distinctive, hand-stitched leather piping and palladium hardware. It was an exclusive vintage piece from Goyard, a bag that routinely auctioned at Sotheby's for upwards of $20,000. A fake, Arthur reminded himself, forcing down his rising suspicion. A very, very good fake. She's just trying to look nice for the date. Clara, Chloe yelled, breaking his train of thought. The 7-year-old let go of Arthur's hand and ran up to the stranger, completely bypassing her usual shyness. Clara crouched down, her face lighting up with a warmth that no corporate boardroom had ever seen. You must be Chloe. Your dad told me you were an expert on butterflies. Do you think you can show me some today? I know all of them, Chloe declared proudly. The three of them walked the garden paths, eating cheap sandwiches on a wooden bench. The chemistry between Arthur and Clara was undeniable, crackling with an intellectual parity neither had experienced in years. But the facade they had constructed was beginning to crack under the weight of their true natures. While examining a complex hydroponic display, Arthur casually muttered, "The solenoid valve is misaligned. If they adjusted the algorithmic output on the main PLC by 2 degrees, they'd increase water efficiency by 30%. Clara stopped mid-bite of her sandwich, staring at him. That is highly specific knowledge for a man who cuts grass. Arthur cleared his throat, his ears burning. I fix my own mowers. You pick up a thing or two about valves. 30 minutes later, Clara's phone rang. It wasn't a standard ringtone, but a secure, encrypted alert. She stepped away, shielding her mouth, but Arthur caught snippets of her hushed, furious voice. She was speaking flawless, Parisian French. Je me fiche des syndicats à Marseille. Coupez le contrat et trouvez un autre navire, she hissed. I don't care about the unions in Marseille. Cut the contract and find another ship. She hung up, turned around, and saw Arthur staring at her. Telemarketer, Clara lied, a forced smile plastered on her face. They are incredibly aggressive these days. Right, Arthur said slowly. Aggressive French telemarketers. Despite the mounting absurdities, neither wanted to pull the ripcord. As the sun began to set, they stood by Arthur's rusted Honda. Clara leaned in, and Arthur kissed her. It was a breathless, earth-shattering kiss that confirmed every suspicion Arthur had. He was falling deeply, dangerously in love with a woman he was entirely lying to. They agreed to meet the following Friday. But fate, as it turned out, had a far more explosive schedule. Friday evening arrived, bringing with it the most prestigious event in the Texas social calendar. The annual Global Innovators Gala, hosted at the Four Seasons downtown. It was an event Arthur had avoided for 2 years, but as a founding board member, his absence was no longer acceptable. Gone was the fraying flannel and the rusted 2006 Honda. Tonight, Arthur Kensington was exactly who he was born to be. He stepped out of a sleek, black Maybach, wearing a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, the priceless Patek Philippe watch gleaming on his wrist. Flashbulbs went off as he walked the red carpet, dodging questions from financial reporters about his next venture capital move. He hated every second of it. His mind was entirely consumed by Clara. He had texted her earlier, claiming he had picked up an emergency night shift landscaping gig to explain his absence. He felt like the lowest form of human garbage. Inside the opulent ballroom, Arthur stood near the back, sipping a glass of rare Macallan scotch, waiting for the obligatory speeches to end so he could escape. The master of ceremonies, a prominent tech billionaire, tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are incredibly honored. Our headline sponsor has just finalized a massive real estate acquisition right here in Austin, but more importantly, she has graciously donated $5 million to our youth education initiative. Please welcome the CEO of Dubois Global Logistics, Ms. Clara Dubois." Arthur's blood ran cold. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Dubois. The grand double doors at the top of the sweeping staircase opened. A woman stepped out, and the entire room seemed to collectively hold its breath. She wore a breathtaking, floor-length gown of emerald silk that draped perfectly over her frame. Diamonds glittered at her throat, catching the light of the chandeliers. Her dark hair was elegantly styled, and her posture radiated the kind of absolute, terrifying power that commanded empires. It was Clara, the diner waitress, the woman who had eaten a stale turkey sandwich with him on a wooden bench. Arthur's mind short-circuited. The fake Patek watch, the flawless French, the macroeconomic analysis of lawnmower parts. It all crashed down on him in a dizzying wave of realization. She wasn't a waitress. She was a titan. Clara delivered a sharp, eloquent speech, her amber eyes scanning the crowd with practiced ease. But as she descended the stairs to polite applause, her gaze swept over the back of the room and locked onto a man in a tuxedo. She stopped dead in her tracks. The polite smile vanished from her face. She stared at Arthur. Arthur stared back. The space between them felt like a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. Slowly, deliberately, Clara broke away from her entourage and marched straight toward him, her emerald gown trailing behind her like liquid glass. "A night shift landscaping gig?" Clara whispered dangerously as she stopped inches from him, her voice vibrating with disbelief. "In a Tom Ford tuxedo? You must have a very affluent clientele, Arthur." Arthur let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh. "I was going to ask if you served sparkling water in a dress like that, but I see you've graduated to $5 million checks. Clara Dubois." "You lied to me," Clara said, her eyes narrowing, though the edge of her lip was betraying a tremor. "You let me pity you. You let me think you were struggling to buy public school supplies. You wiped tables at a diner," Arthur shot back, leaning in. "You poured water into a potted plant and told me you were studying for community college. Who goes undercover at a greasy spoon?" "I was assessing a hostile real estate takeover," she hissed defensively. "Why were you driving a biohazard of a Honda?" "Because every woman I met only wanted my bank account," Arthur confessed, his voice dropping, stripping away the anger to reveal the raw vulnerability beneath. "I wanted someone to look at me, just me, the father, the man, and think that was enough. And you did. You gave me free coffee when you thought I was broke." Clara stared at him, the anger slowly draining from her eyes, replaced by a profound, mirrored understanding. She had spent her entire adult life surrounded by men who wanted to leverage her power. She had played the waitress to escape it, just as he had played the landscaper. They were two ghosts haunting the exact same lie. "I brought a $50 counterfeit wallet to our date," Arthur admitted, shaking his head. "I had to force my chief operating officer to pretend to be a French telemarketer," Clara countered, a genuine smile finally breaking through her stoic facade. "Surtout," Arthur murmured, offering his arm to the billionaire CEO. "Does this mean I don't have to pretend to fix lawn mowers anymore?" Clara linked her arm through his, the diamonds at her wrist catching the light. "Only if I never have to wear a polyester apron again. Take me out of here, Arthur Kensington. I believe you owe me a proper dinner." As they walked out of the ballroom together, leaving the whispers of high society behind them, Arthur realized his poverty test had failed spectacularly, and in doing so had yielded the greatest fortune of his life. The ultimate undercover romance just proved that sometimes the biggest lies lead to the most honest truths. Both Arthur and Clara built walls to protect their fortunes, but they ended up finding the one thing money absolutely cannot buy: a genuine equal partnership. What did you think of that epic ballroom reveal? If you loved this twisty billionaire romance, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your fellow drama lovers, and subscribe for more incredible stories.